Hi, it's the 9th of March today and welcome to another weekly crypto roundup video. So before we jump into the topics I want to talk about this week, let's take a quick glance at the markets. And if we have a look here at CoinMarketCap, we can see the market cap is currently at 365 billion. Now that's down massively on last week. We were around the 450 billion mark last week. So earlier today, this was around 350 billion. So we were down about 100 billion on the week. It's actually pulled back just in the last few hours. It's pulled back a little tiny bit, but overall everything across the board has been down massively over the last couple of days, probably 10 to 20% for most of these large coins in the top 50 over the last 2 days. Now it's somewhat ironic because I think last week I was looking at the kind of charts and we'd had a little bit more stability than we had over the previous kind of months, and I was hoping, and I think I even kind of mentioned that I thought hopefully that might be the end of the kind of big drops we saw like at the beginning of February, but that's not the case. We've seen big drops over the last couple of days. We are starting to see a little bit of a kind of pullback here. So Bitcoin was down at about 8,500 when I woke up this morning. It's back up to about 9,000 now. So that's indicative of the volatility really of the markets. Whether this is the kind of floor and we now kind of be creeping back from that, we don't know. A lot of people thought it was the floor yesterday. And then we saw another kind of big drop today. Now, if you're invested in crypto for the long term, if you believe in its potential for the long term, these kind of daily and weekly swings are not necessarily a big issue. We've seen tiny amounts of kind of adoption of cryptocurrencies in terms of the general population so far. So these swings can be quite catastrophic to people. If you'd invested, at the highs in kind of January and you're now sat there with, 50% losses or whatever, it's not easy. Of course it's not. And nobody likes to see these kind of big kind of down swings. But, this is indicative of a very, very early stage market. We're still seeing big swings. We're still seeing everything basically tied to Bitcoin. If Bitcoin, takes a tumble, everything else takes a tumble, which kind of exacerbates the situation. So anyway, the markets are down, a lot, 85 billion from, I think, the video this time last week. But if you believe in stuff for the long term, keep holding, keep doing what you're doing, and, maybe next week we'll have 100 billion gain. Who knows? Anyway, let's jump over to the first story. And the first thing I want to talk about this week is the Binance hack. So a few days ago, people logged into their accounts and had seen that trades had been going through that they hadn't approved or actually kind of set up. And there was a lot of kind of FUD on the kind of forums. A lot of people were saying, get rid of all your, take all your, coins out of kind of Binance. It's been hacked. You're going to lose everything. Now, Binance, reacted pretty well. I think, and this is maybe, I think, to their credit. And it's something we haven't seen from a lot of other exchanges in the past where, things have happened. They've tended not to kind of address it. They haven't addressed it kind of head on. They haven't kept people up to date. And I think Binance have been pretty good. So during this kind of period, I think trading was frozen for a short while, but they quite quickly reversed all the irregular trades. Some of it seemed to be sort of tied down to API, maybe third-party API kind of calls that were not necessarily locked down as they should be. Then there was a suggestion from Binance that people have been through phishing sites, and that's how their login details had been compromised. There were some issues because some people had API, third-party API stuff, but then there were some users that said they'd never set up the API usage and still had issues and still had sort of like fraudulent kind of trades, as it were. But anyway, Binance reversed all the what they term irregular trades pretty quickly, and everything within about 24 hours was back up and running as it should be. So I think they're to be commended on the way they dealt with the kind of issues. Obviously, anything like this in a kind of pretty immature market, can have a big swing on the kind of markets, in general. And excuse me, it's not a great it's not a great PR thing for Binance that these issues happened, and also it's not great for cryptocurrencies as a whole, because it plays into that kind of narrative of the mainstream media that things are kind of like kind of dodgy and you could be hacked any time and it only exists digitally and you could lose everything from somebody just hacking your computer. Excuse me. So from that point of view, not great, but the way they dealt with it, I think, was to be commended. And it looks like we're sat now back, where we were before. That nobody kind of actually kind of lost money in the kind of long term. That everything that kind of happened or seemed to be happening behind the scenes was quickly rectified. So I think they should be commended for that. So let's jump on to the next story, and that is Ledger. So this week, if you have a Ledger Nano S, Ledger actually released a new firmware update. So it's 1.4.1, and it's it has a number of significant kind of advantages over them. Some security advantages that might not be that relevant to the everyday user. But the largest thing which I think people will want to upgrade for is because the number of apps which can be loaded onto the Nano S at any one time has been raised up to 18. Now it depends on which cryptocurrencies you use, but it can be up to 18 different cryptocurrencies on the Ledger Nano S at one time. The update procedure is here. I'll put all these links below. So this is a step-by-step update of how you update your firmware. To be honest, it's a pretty clunky procedure. When it first came out a couple of days ago, I upgraded my Ledger here, and it went pretty well all the way down to, I think it was around here, and then it kind of crashed. The machine wouldn't, the device wouldn't kind of go past this kind of stage, and I actually got down to, let me just find it here. Where was it? So it's the bit here where it says update. So got to here, it just froze. Nothing happened. I left it for about a quarter of an hour. Nothing had happened. It's pretty simple actually to get out of this. There were a few people commenting that they'd had this, and I think it was largely down to the load on Ledger's servers. But basically, if you do get stuck at this stage here, what you simply do, so you have your machine here, it'd be plugged in, unplug it, hold this left button down, plug the Ledger Nano back in, you hold it for a few seconds, and it comes back to this bootloader here, and then it picked up for me. So it went to this update thing, and then rather than just sitting there at the update, it then went through to the installing firmware. So it took me a couple of attempts, but everything seems quite good now. The only other issue I had is that I had to uninstall everything apart from the Bitcoin app before I had enough space on the device to install the firmware. So that's something you might have to be aware of, that you might have to uninstall all your apps before you actually run the upgrade. But it's nice to see that there's new functionality coming to the Ledger Nano S, and I think having up to 18 different apps on the device at one time is great, because before that you could have different kind of apps, but you had to uninstall one in order to reactivate another one in order to use it. So that's really good. Anyway, jumping over to the next story, which is Coinbase. So basically this week they announced an index fund, and it's not quite as wide-ranging and exciting as it might appear at first glance. It's limited to the top 4 cryptocurrencies, and it's actually limited, if we scroll down here, you'll see it's actually limited to accredited investors actually in the US. So only the US and only for accredited investors. And this is largely large scale kind of investors, fairly well-to-do kind of individuals. I think you need a net worth of like $1 million or something like that. So accredited investors, will be able to invest in an index fund. It's only of the top 4 currencies, and it's the sort of percentages of the top 4 currencies are done by market cap. So if we have a look here, the index fund comprises of Bitcoin 62%, 27% Ethereum, 7% Bitcoin Cash, and 4% Litecoin. So basically it's the coins that you can buy through Coinbase anyway, but they will be making this index fund available. And I think, it's an easier way, well, it potentially will be an easier way for accredited investors, got it right that time, in the US to invest without actually having to kind of, buy coins kind of directly. So I think, in the long term, it's a good thing. No doubt if it proves successful, they'll open it up to other investors and probably open up the number of kind of currencies as well. So I think this is the kind of thing we're going to see more and more of over 2018 and indeed 2019. So it's quite good news there, I think, for the markets in general. So the next story I want to talk about is Mark Carney. And for those of you who don't know, Mark Carney is the governor of the Bank of England. And he had a talk basically this week where he was talking about kind of cryptocurrencies. And it was generally quite negatively received, I think, within the crypto community. But I don't think a lot of what he said was particularly bad. So he basically has called for kind of regulation of cryptocurrencies rather than an outright ban, which I think vast majority of people realise wouldn't work anyway. And he talked about the fact that he didn't think they threatened financial stability or anything like that, but they should be held to the same high standards as the rest of the financial system. And it might be somewhat ironic because looking at what certainly most of the large investment banks have been up to over the last kind of decade or so. But if that's the kind of high standards that he wants cryptos, to adhere to, I think that's fair enough in a way. It was a fairly broad ranging, but it was a fairly reasonable kind of like response. He made some comments which I thought were perfectly kind of valid. So one of them was about. You see, I'll just read it. So it was considered that if you'd taken out £1,000 student loan in Bitcoin last December to pay for your sterling living costs for next year, you'd be short about £500 right now. If you'd done the same last September, you'd be ahead by 2,000. That's quite a lottery, which is completely true. And what we do need to do as a kind of community is make sure that people are not just throwing money blindly into something that they don't understand. It is a very volatile market. I think that's a perfectly reasonable sort of position to kind of have. He could have gone back further than that. He said, well, if you'd taken out that £1,000 at the beginning of last year, you'd now be sat on 1,000% gains, even with the downturn. But, let's be kind of fair to him. He wasn't particularly kind of critical of cryptocurrencies. This is something that obviously the Bank of England and the Fed in the US have no control over. That's not going to be something that they're particularly happy about. They love to be able to control the money supply, and they cannot control the supply of kind of cryptocurrencies. So the next best thing from them is regulation. Now, I'm hoping from some of the stuff he said, not just this week, but in the past, that it will be a relatively light-handed touch within cryptocurrencies in the UK. But we shall see. But it's interesting that what we've had politicians over the last kind of month or so, talking more and more about kind of cryptocurrencies. And that really takes me on to my last story, which is quite an amusing one. So for those of you who do not know who Diane Abbott is, she is a UK politician who I think by any reasonable standards could be considered a moron. And she this week came out and said that basically Bitcoin is a gigantic Ponzi scheme, and that said that if the Labour Party actually get into kind of power, then it would be regulated. Now, everybody's talking about regulation, so I don't think that's necessarily sort of particularly controversial. But to say that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, she doesn't understand cryptocurrencies at all. She said that Bitcoin could easily collapse, and said, or if everybody took their Bitcoin money and tried to buy a car, then the whole system would collapse. Which, in some ways is a bit like kind of fiat. If everybody tried to get their money out of the banks, it would collapse because the banks don't own the money that they lend out to people. The reality is that not every Bitcoin is going to be attempted to be cashed in at the same time. It's, it shows a little bit quite how little she knows about cryptocurrencies. But again, she hadn't been in the news for a few weeks, and she is known for making stupid comments. During the last general election, she said that the Labour Party, if they got in, would employ 10,000 more police officers, and it would cost £300,000, which equates to about £30 a police officer a year. There was a terrible tragedy actually in the UK, a high-rise fire last year, and she tweeted that it's actually down here, she tweeted that one of the lessons to be learned from the Grenfell Tower disaster is that fire puts out water, which was another classic. And she's known for saying stupid things. She only really opens her mouth in order to change feet. So it's amusing. It's this is what we will see increasingly from politicians. Everybody kind of wants some column inches, and they will kind of come out with these kind of ridiculous kind of statements. But anyway, that's it. If you don't know who Diane Abbott is, look her up online. She has said some ridiculous things over the past, and hopefully it may give you a little bit of a laugh. But that's it for my stories this week. Let's jump over to the giveaway. So this time last week I said I'll be giving $10 to somebody worth $10 worth of Navcoin to somebody. I had a fair few comments, so I'm going to go here to the YouTube random comment picker, and this was the video URL, so we'll just do that. There were 9 unique commenters, so let's do that, and here we go. So the winner is Andreas Schultz. I have really enjoyed the video. Good work, Dave. Thank you very much, Andreas. I will send you 10 Navcoin here. Let's do that now. Let's just see the price currently. So bear with me. So Navcoin's currently $1.35. So oops, let's do this. So $10 divided by 135 is 7.4 something. So let's say 7.5 nav. And just bear with me 1 second. I'll just pause the video. I'm just going to unlock my wallet quickly. Hi, so sorry about that. It's just unlocking the wallet. So this was the address. Let me just double check that. So, oops, sure there's no spaces. And it was 7.5. Let's preview that. Send coins. Okay, so those coins have been sent. Congratulations to Andreas. And next week we will be doing a giveaway. Same thing again, $10 giveaway. But next week we're going to be doing it with Digibyte. So it's a coin that people have been talking about a little bit more recently over the last couple of weeks. It was in Doug Polk's community portfolio, albeit for a short time. So next week we're going to be giving away Digibyte, and the same rules as before. Leave a comment below and put your Digibyte, so DGB, and then your Digibyte address below. And next week I will pick another random winner. But have a great week, and hopefully I will see you next week. Take care. Bye bye.